Everyone calls this Darth Vader's rise. The mask goes on, the galaxy trembles. That's the version you know. In Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, James Luceno documents something different. He calls Year One something closer to a prison sentence, and Vader himself agrees. So the question isn't what Vader did in his first year, it's what he was quietly planning and who he was planning it against. It starts with the suit, not as armor or a symbol of power, as a question Vader cannot answer and can't escape. Because the first time he's alone inside it, with no medical droids, no Palpatine, just the sound of that respirator, he doesn't reach out in the Force. He doesn't take stock of what he's gained. He sits with the one thing Mustafar didn't burn away from him, his suspicion. The novel gives us his internal state directly, and the language is not what you'd expect from the galaxy's most feared enforcer. He describes the suit as solitary confinement, prison of the worst sort, continual torture. That's not a metaphor. That's Vader's own assessment. The man who gave up everything for power now sits inside that power and wonders if it was engineered to contain him rather than amplify him. Because if Palpatine built the suit to its full capability, if Vader is already operating at the ceiling of what this armor allows, then he is exactly as powerful as his master wants him to be. Not more, never more. And that thought is the one he can't let go of. Not in week 1, not in month 6, not at the end of year 1. It stays. But here's what makes it worse. He can't confront Palpatine. Not yet. Because he genuinely doesn't know what he is yet. He knows what he lost, but he has no idea what he's actually gained. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Everyone focuses on the psychology of the suit. The isolation, the claustrophobia, the sensory deprivation. That's real. Luceno documents all of it. But underneath that is something arguably more devastating. Because Vader is, at his core, a fighter. And what the suit took from him as a warrior is a separate category of loss entirely. Let's run the numbers. The boots, canted forward, raised in the heel, so heavy he sometimes has to call on the Force just to cross a bridge. The pectoral armor restricts his arm movement so severely that he cannot raise his hands above shoulder height. Think about what that means for a Form 5 practitioner. The entire aerial vocabulary, the overhead power strikes, the aggressive upswings that made Anakin Skywalker the Republic's most lethal battlefield commander, gone. Observers watching Vader fight in year 1 describe him as having no defined style at all. Just vertical strikes, brute force, because that's all the suit allows. His hands compound it. The new prosthetics are too large for the grip he spent a decade perfecting. Right hand wrapped loose on the crystal housing, fluid, instinctive, those hands are gone. The replacements need a thicker hilt, a longer handle, what Luceno calls a weapon verging on ungainly. And by the time Vader faces Roan Shrine, his style is calcified into something witnesses describe as antique, stationary, defensive, blade held straight out, elbows locked to his sides, wrists only, because he's protecting the control box on his chest, the one Shrine spends their entire duel trying to reach, the one that if struck cleanly would stop Darth Vader's heart where he stands. And then there's the Force. No lightning, not ever. His limbs are artificial. Any arc he generated would destroy his own circuitry. The most devastating offensive ability in a Sith's arsenal, permanently locked away. Palpatine knows this, and Vader files it away. At this time, he has no visions either. The precognitive ability that made Anakin impossible to outmaneuver in battle burned out at Mustafar. Vader reaches for it instinctively in the early months and finds nothing. And somewhere in that silence, he asks himself, with the loss of my limbs, have I also lost strength in the Force? He doesn't know. That's not grief, it's not rage. That's clinical uncertainty about whether he's still what he was. And it might be the most unsettling detail in the whole novel. Because in that uncertainty, he gives himself a name. Not the Emperor's Enforcer, not the galaxy's most feared Sith Lord. In his own internal language, Vader calls himself another Grievous. General Grievous, a cyborg weapon that carved through Jedi Masters for years before he was put down on Utapau. Not a Sith, not a student, not an heir, a weapon with legs. That's how Vader sees himself in year 1. And the tragedy is, he's not wrong. But it gets worse, because if the suit is the physical prison, Palpatine delivers the political one without raising his voice. Vader is mid-sentence reporting on his execution of Senator Fang Zar, and he trails off, because his train of thought was heading somewhere treasonous. He's having the same thought every Sith apprentice is supposed to have. Why not just strike down my master? Palpatine catches the silence, leans in, and makes Vader admit he does not yet fully understand the dark side. That's when Palpatine reveals the real prison Vader is in by saying, "Because you know that I could easily overwhelm the delicate electrical systems of your suit. That's the off switch. You will do what I say because I own the machine that keeps you breathing." And Vader has no counter-argument, because the suit he already suspects was built as a cage is also the only thing keeping him alive. To rebel is to die. To comply is to survive in the cage. Palpatine didn't build an apprentice in year one. He built a hostage. Now here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part that most fans never actually set with, because you'd expect the missions to fix it. You'd expect Vader to get out there, complete his first assignment, execute a few separatist holdouts, and feel the weight of what he's become settle into place. The galaxy trembles, he's Darth Vader now. Story over, right? The rise of Darth Vader actually shows us planet after planet, Jedi survivor after Jedi survivor. Vader arrives with stormtroopers, Vader kills, Vader leaves. No philosophy discussion with Palpatine. No Sith training in the deeper arts of the dark side. No strategy briefing. Just an assignment, like a hammer that gets put back in the drawer after the nail goes in. And Vader starts asking a question he can't stop asking. When does the real training begin? Because it hasn't, not once, in an entire year. Here are Vader's thoughts. Try as he might to convince himself, his was not real power, but merely the execution of power. He's not the architect. He's not the strategist. He's the fist, and the fist doesn't get to ask what it's hitting. Vader understands, in a way that's almost clinical in the novel, that weapons are replaceable, and he is, by every structural measure, a weapon. The galaxy looks at Vader and sees the terror of Palpatine's reign made flesh. But Vader looks inward and sees something else entirely. He sees a man who was promised the keys to the dark side and got a mop and a bucket instead. He's not a student, he's a contractor, and the contract doesn't include a promotion. And then he says something. This is the moment. I want you to pay attention here, because it's buried in the novel, and most people who've read it remember the suit, remember Mustafar, but they walk right past this scene. This is the one that unlocks their whole relationship. On Coruscant, Vader is on the surgical table after a failed mission to Murkana, and Vader is furious, blaming the suit, blaming the Star Destroyer, blaming Cinar for not finishing his starfighter in time. And 2 Jedi got away. Palpatine just waves it off. The Jedi are finished, their order is crushed, let them atone in exile. Palpatine enforces the lesson. We are not crude stuff, Lord Vader, but from me you will learn the truth of it. And then Vader asks the question Palpatine has been waiting for since Mustafar. In the same way you told me the truth about being able to save Padme, he says it directly to his master's face. This man who just helped burn the Jedi Temple, who executed separatist leaders on Mustafar, who pledged himself body and soul to the Sith, is calling Darth Sidious a liar. And Palpatine doesn't answer the question. He doesn't defend himself. He does something far more precise. He makes it Vader's fault. I had nothing to do with Padme Amidala's death. She died as a result of your anger at her betrayal. And Vader, the most powerful Force user alive, looks at the floor and says, I'm to blame. This is a man who has been so thoroughly broken that when he finally musters the courage to ask the one question that could free him, his master turns it around in 10 seconds flat, and Vader thanks him for it. Palpatine didn't build an apprentice. He built a man who would eventually apologize for his own chains. The entire seduction, the legend of Darth Plagueis, the promise that the dark side could stop death itself, the beautiful lie that Anakin Skywalker crossed every line to believe, was a transaction. Vader bought it, and within a month of closing that deal, he already knows the receipt is worthless. What gets me every time I read this is what Vader does with that knowledge. He doesn't break, he doesn't turn back, he files it away. He performs the obedience that Palpatine needs on the outside, while something on the inside quietly begins to crystallize. A plan, one we'll return to. So what does Palpatine do? He gives Vader purpose. Ask most fans why Vader hunted surviving Jedi in Year 1, and you'll get the same answer. Rage. It was personal. It was ideological. He hated them for what they represented, what they took from him, what the Order had cost Anakin Skywalker. And sure, that's part of it, but this novel frames these missions completely differently. Not as crusades or assignments. Vader shows up with troops, eliminates the target, moves on. He's not learning to be a Sith. He's not being elevated in the dark side arts. He's being kept busy. Think about that from Palpatine's perspective. You have the most dangerous being in the galaxy, someone who was already among the most powerful Force wielders alive before the suit. The one thing you can't afford is for that being to sit still, to think, to ask in the quiet between assignments why the real training hasn't started. So you give him targets. You dress up the busy work in the language of dominance and efficiency. And Vader, who is asking himself in those quiet moments exactly that question, gets sent back out before the silence can get too loud. It's not a partnership, it's a management strategy. And it works for a while, until Kashyyyk. Vader's missions begin to blur together, and then one stands out. Because at the end of Year 1, Vader kills Roan Shrine, one of the last Jedi Masters. You'd expect triumph and closure, the galaxy's new order affirmed in the death of another remnant. That's not what the book gives us. Anakin was gone, a memory so deeply buried he might have dreamed rather than lived it. This is the death that matters, not Mustafar, where the body burned and the soul fractured. Here, where the memory of who he was finally sinks below the surface for good. Here's where the suit stops being a prison, because the only reason it felt like a prison, the only reason the question of containment even haunted him, was that Anakin was still in there asking it. The moment Anakin goes quiet, the suit just becomes an environment. Vader stops fighting the armor because there's no one left inside it who remembers what freedom was like. You can't cage a man who no longer exists. But what we get after that line, almost as a footnote, is the most important sentence in the entire novel. He scanned the stars, looking forward to a time when he could find an apprentice of his own, and together with that one, topple Darth Sidious from his throne. It gave him something to live for. Year 1, not the middle of Vader's career, not Return of the Jedi. Year 1, the moment Anakin dies, is the exact same moment Vader decides to kill his master. The submission and the revenge are written into the same breath, almost as if Palpatine's design created the very thing it was supposed to prevent. And then, 22 years pass. The Empire rises, the Jedi are gone, the Sith Grand Plan executes exactly as designed, and Vader, the instrument of all of it, spends more than 2 decades searching for an apprentice who never quite arrives. Starkiller, the Imperial Senate, the officers, nobody fits. Nobody is ready, until a kid from Tatooine blows up a Death Star, and on a second Death Star, standing over his son, with everything bleeding out around him, Vader makes the move he decided on in Year 1. He grabs Palpatine, he throws him into the void, he wins, and it kills him. The plan worked. The only thing keeping Vader functional for 22 years was the promise of that single moment, and when it finally arrived, it cost him everything he had.